This video is a follow-on from the previous 17 videos dealing with price in the precious metals markets. If you haven't seen those videos, I'd recommend you doing so before watching this one. Let's turn our attentions now to fiscal prudence. In addition to giving a currency value it would otherwise not have, there's another very important facet of having a gold standard, and that is a gold standard demands that governments are fiscally prudent. This basically means that governments have to be financially responsible. They have to budget properly to balance the books, so to speak. If only. The gold standard acts as a restraining mechanism, serving as a curb against government spending. How does the gold standard act as a restraining mechanism, you might ask? Well, basically because gold is a scarce resource. There's not so much of it in the world, and what little there is hard to come by. In order to get it, raw materials have to be mined and refined, so it takes a lot of time and effort to dig it out of the ground and then process it. But still, how does the gold standard act as a restraining mechanism? Both these factors, the scarcity and the effort involved in mining and refining the raw material, ensure that supply of gold is necessarily limited. And because with a gold standard, gold and currencies are linked, this means that the money supply can only increase in line with the amount of new, above-ground, refined gold entering the economy. Analogies are rarely perfect, but the following might help to explain the linking of gold and currencies with a gold standard. Imagine the gold standard being like keeping a dog on a tight leash, where the dog represents governments and their spending. The dog might pull at the leash, but the owner is in control and holds it firm. So the economy is on a tight leash with a gold standard. The powers that be can't just increase the money supply as they desire. Governments can't spend with impunity and build up debt. If, however, the owner were to have one of those extendable long leashes, then the owner would have a lot less control over the money supply. Debt would increase easily. Worse still, if the owner were to let the dog off the leash, then it would bound away and might be difficult to get back under control. That's precisely what's happened in our present era. Indeed, ever since the Nixon shock. Nixon undid the leash and let the dog loose. Governments are out of control dogs running around all over the place, barking at people and doing whatever dogs like to do. We, the people, are the dog owners in this analogy, by the way, or at least we should be, but we've handed responsibility over to the central banks. Big mistake, in my opinion. And of course, dogs being dogs, governments being governments, have been anything but fiscally prudent. I think it's safe to say that, in fact, been financially irresponsible. They spend with impunity. The result is the world is drowning in debt. This becomes apparent if we consider debt to GDP ratios. This is a metric used to compare the country's national debt to its gross domestic product. It speaks to the ability of a country to pay off the debt because it sets the debt owed against what can be produced by that country. In the US, the ratio is around 133%. That's pretty high, although not as high as Japan, which stands at 257%. Anyway, even at this stage, it's doubtful that the US debt will ever be paid off. At the time of producing this video, the debt in the US, according to the US debt clock, is recorded at being about $31.5 trillion, and it's increasing at a truly incredible rate. Government revenue is only $3.5 trillion, so the US can pay back only a tenth of the debt on an annual basis. That is assuming that the debt doesn't increase. Yeah. Back to gold and currencies. One of the big problems with our present monetary system is that currency creation is way too simple. It's just a matter of a decision being made by the powers that be, or our overlords, as I like to refer to them as. I should also say that the other issue with currencies is that they are created out of thin air. Clif High refers to this conjuring trick as Babylonian Money Magic. It's a trick, a scam, a con, or whatever term you like to use. Gold, on the other hand, most certainly cannot be created out of nothing like currencies can. It's worth saying also that a gold standard ensures that inflation is necessarily limited. Inflation is defined in classical economics as an increase in the money supply, although more correctly it should be referred to as currency creation. Anyhow, an increase in the money supply is the main cause of inflation. The converse is also true, obviously. Without a gold standard, governments have no real restraint on their spending. They increase the money supply as desired, and then we get inflation. For those of you who are more visually orientated, it might be helpful to think of inflation as being a balloon. We can call the balloon the money supply. To inflate an ordinary balloon, we need to add air. With our money supply balloon, it inflates when more currency is added into the economy. With more currency in the system, prices for products go up. Bear in mind that rising prices are the end result of inflation, the increase in the money supply. Rising prices that we see, say in a supermarket, are the fruits of the tree, the apples on the apple tree. I refer you to an earlier video I did entitled Inflation, Rising Prices to get more of an understanding on this matter. I would suggest that a better way to think about inflation is to see inflation in terms of purchasing power. So when the purchasing power of a currency decreases, the ability of the currency to pay for goods and services decreases. Everything is relative. With inflation, essentially what happens is that the currency has lost some of its purchasing power in relation to the product. The loss in purchasing power means that it takes more currency to buy that same product. But anyway, I should say that the best way to prevent inflation from occurring in the first instance is to limit currency creation and to have governments be prudent about spending. And the best way to do this is to institute a gold standard. And we also have to get rid of central banks so that we the people are in control once again. I split this topic into a number of videos, so there's another however many to follow. In the next video, I'll continue to talk about central banks and governments, deficit spending, MMT, QE and YCC as it relates to currencies and inflation. And then after that, I will go on to say what this should mean for precious metals. Wise up and rise up.